So today we're going to talk about early and late childhood development. We're done now with the infant social and infant cognitive development. I hope that everything's uploaded on Moodle. It was sent yesterday, so all your lectures and PDFs should be available to you now. The exam is going to be the week of the 14th of March, because somebody sent me an email saying it's after 2 weeks, so I was a bit surprised. I hope the date has not been changed. So now we're kind of moving on to understand kids beyond just their social and their cognitive development. So it's a bit more like comprehensive. So I'm going to divide it into like years of life. So kids from the age of 3 to 6, can just someone send me in chat, like what is an important milestone for kids in that age? Just one milestone that's important. So talking is important, yes, because by now their language is pretty good. Reading, okay. So can they actually read, or is it they're starting to learn? So I like the talking, I like the playing, so they're learning, okay. And where are they headed at this point in time, from age 3 to 6? What part, like they're going to where? And they're going to school, okay. Preschool, school, okay. So basically by the age of 3, the representational world has begun to be occupied by composites of many things. So they have already, they're talking, their motor milestones are already supposed to be on track. So now they're exploring the world, okay? So this representational world becomes a reference for processing biopsychosocial stimuli. Now you're going to hear that word biopsychosocial now and probably forever when you're learning about like human behavior, interaction, problems that happen to humans, because these are the sort of the effects of biology, the psychological makeup of a person, and the social environment. So if somebody is depressed, we look at what are the biopsychosocial stimuli in that person's life that would explain why that person's depressed. So if someone is clinically depressed, yes, the clinical symptoms of all people who are depressed are the same, because that's what DSM says. However, everybody's life is different. So the biology may be the same, but the psychosocial components are different. So it's a very interesting way of looking at people. And whenever we have an assessment, we must look at that part because it helps us understand people, as well as put a treatment plan, and then reassess our treatment plan based on our understanding of a person now and over time, okay? So how do they process these stimuli? First of all, you need to receive a stimulus. So through any of your senses, you receive a stimulus. You see something, you hear something, you touch something, you feel something, and that will initiate an initial emotional response. So you see something, so do I like it? Do I not like it? Am I bothered by it? I hear something. So you start to have an emotional response to a stimulus, okay? And then there's this complex processing of mental contents that kind of motivates a trigger to generate then output responses, okay? So you have a stimulus, you have an emotional response to it, then you have an output response. So how am I going to respond to what I saw, what I heard, what I touched, what I felt? I'm going to say something, I'm going to do something based on that process, okay? Then you have an activation of a capacity to observe in relationships. So sort of then in interpersonal interactions, based on stimuli that you receive and an emotional response that you have, then you have an action, and that kind of plays out in a relationship to someone, to something, okay? So then you start to observe the capacity. We then have a capacity for self-reflection that becomes activated, okay? You're starting to understand yourself. Now, these concepts seem very intense, you know, and you're looking at 3 to 6 years of age, but that's when it really starts to understand yourself in your environment, okay? Then you construct new representations that will involve final output responses and the response or lack of from others. Now, parental involvement here is really essential because again, people's responses vary, and then sometimes you have someone that kind of guides you through that process to normalize it or not normalize it, okay? Let's say a child sees a behavior from another child, they're on the playground. So there's an initial, like a visual sort of response. The child then goes out to play with this other child, okay? Now, based on, you know, how they understand play and sort of the rules of play. So it can be a reciprocal and positive experience or not, okay? So the other kid may like push the child, not involve the child, okay? And so the self-reflection of, you know, if I'm pushed away, then, you know, that nobody loves me, nobody wants to play with me. And so the child will then run to their parent and say, you know, this is what happened. And so parents usually try to normalize these things and say, that's okay, let's try again, versus, you know, making it a big deal and like leaving the playground, okay? So this could be a positive experience, and it's kind of like it will leave an imprint, okay? Because if every time this child is not engaged in play, and how parents respond to it. So, you know, if parents are always going to make the others be the bad guy, versus, you know, what did this child do to influence this relationship, okay? So how did you play? Maybe that you said something, maybe you did something. So again, it's not to initiate self-blame, that's not the objective, but it's really trying to understand, you know, how things work in relationships. So the major developmental tasks of early childhood primarily include an autonomous and valued identity, as well as a gender identity. So the valued and autonomous identity is really being separate, like you are separate from your mom, your dad, you are a separate human being, okay? And this is really important because when kids don't have that sense of autonomy, then we start to see separation anxiety. So yesterday in my clinic, I saw a 22-year-old patient. He has ADHD, but he also has Asperger's. So Asperger's is a kind of higher functioning autism. So during the interview, his mom was there, and my residents noticed that like throughout the entire time, like he is holding her hand, okay? So this mom, because she's been so worried for her son, like I've known them for like 10 years, so he was like 11, 12 when I first met them. He had a lot of struggles, and so the mom was really overpowering. But this overpowering behavior wasn't just at the age of 10, it obviously started when he was much younger. And he's never really had that sense of autonomy, okay? He's really like, you kind of feel like they're stuck together by glue. And we've worked on it, I mean, over the years, and it's really hard for her to let go, okay? Now he's in university, so that's a bit of autonomy. You know, he's managing his own studies, which is also autonomy. So it's important for parents from early on to foster that sense of independence, because it really helps children become more confident. And one of the things that's essential is autonomy in sleep. So if kids don't, usually they're with their parents the first few months of life, because obviously there's feeding and whatnot. But then from 6 months onwards, kids can really be in a separate room. So if you have a 5-year-old child who still sleeps with her parents in the same room, in the same bed, so then you have a problem, okay? And a lot of times we really look into the dynamics between the couple, as well as, you know, sometimes they feel more comfortable and safer if the child is with them versus the child being in a separate room. And so you have to really dig into that, you know, why is that happening? Okay, so this other kid I was seeing, I'm not sure if I told you about her, 6-year-old with mood issues. So this 6-year-old, as well as her 9-year-old brother, as well as a 6-month-old sister, are all still sleeping in the parents' room. So here we have a major problem, and our sort of first goal is to get all these, at least the 2 kids, out of that room. And mother is like, but I feel so much more comfortable when they're with me. And the dad will wake up in the middle of the night and sort of cover them so that they don't get cold. So you're not really fostering autonomy and independence. The second point is gender identity, and we'll talk a little bit down, in a few slides, as to what is gender identity and what is sexual identity. But gender identity is just, you know, for kids to know who they are, like, am I a girl, am I a boy? And so by age 3, that's really, you know, quite clear, or should be clear, that, you know, she is a girl or he is a boy. Do you think parents can influence the gender identity? Just yes or no in chat. Do you think parents, let me rephrase, is it really the parents that foster that sense of gender identity, or can it be, or does it develop sort of autonomously? What do you guys think? So someone says society and parents, autonomous, it starts at home. Okay. I mean, it's complicated. I mean, the variety of answers go from the individual, the child, versus the parents, versus the environment, versus society. So it is complex. Okay. So it can start off by simply, you know, how does the child dress? What do you dress them in? Okay. So that's kind of the projection of the parent onto the child. Okay, I have a baby boy, and so there's a stereotype, you know, you can dress boys in blue or white or yellow, and if it's a girl, it's more like pink. And so that's kind of the beginning of, you know, the parent projection onto, so the parental sort of how they view their child is important. And then it's through society and what these kids observe, and obviously how they dress and how they behave. So we see a lot of girls, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9 years of age who are nowadays not really interested in dolls, not really interested, but I mean, they know that they're girls. So she's very sure that she's a girl, but she's like not interested in dolls. She's more interested in, you know, like games and computer stuff. I mean, does that mean that she has a gender identity? Do you guys think? Yes or no? So you have a young girl who's just not interested in dolls, wants to play with video games. Does that mean she has a problem? No, she does not. Yeah. So it doesn't, like, her behavior or habits don't really affect, or not really, you know, if, you know, connected with, or do not really affect her gender identity. She knows who she is. And if you ask her, are you a girl, are you a boy? I mean, obviously at the age of 3, that's when they start to really figure it out, understand. Okay. So they also have experiences that enable them to construct and follow sort of additions to their self-representation. So I'm going to go from down up. All right. So a conscience. So what is a conscience? What does that mean? Okay. So to have a conscience, that's kind of a big word for a 3-year-old. Okay. So it's not possible that a 3-year-old has a fully developed conscience so that they know absolutely what's right and what's wrong. But that's kind of the beginning of the development of moral sense, ethics, right, wrong. You know, that's the beginning of it. Peer identity. Okay. So that's kind of like if you have a child who's autonomous and has a sense of who they are, then they will develop a peer identity. So in a group, they will know where they stand. But if you have somebody who has not developed autonomy, they're kind of still glued and kind of still super attached to home, to mom, they don't know who they are. So therefore, in a group, they're lost. Okay. So we worry about these kids because what happens is they find somebody to latch onto in a group. And so they tend to be followers. Okay. They tend to be pleasers. They're looking for that sort of approval. Okay. So you can see that obviously will negatively impact their sense of self and self-esteem. So it's really important for parents to push for autonomy. Again, it's sort of a thin line between being autonomous, okay, and being, what's the word? Entitled, okay? So you can be an autonomous kid, independent, but then entitled is another one where you're super autonomous and you feel like you don't need anyone and you can run the show and you're absolutely entitled. So that's not a good sort of end of that spectrum. So you can have completely dependent and completely like entitled. So you want what's in between, okay? Now the sexual identity, we talked about the gender identity, which is knowing if you're a girl or a boy, but then your sexual identity is your preference, okay? Now, at the age of 3, 4, 5, 6, I mean, it's not something that's really, you know, out there in the forefront. I mean, girls and boys in that age tend to kind of like girls play with girls, boys play with boys, and they're not really focused on the gender as much as they're focused on the game, right? If they're playing or running or, okay. But sometimes in role play, like in make-believe play, which is completely normal for this age group, it's interesting to see what roles they take on, okay? So again, you know, if they're playing police and whatever, boys tend to want to be that role and girls not. Girls prefer to be the mom or the teacher in a make-believe story, okay? But that's more about their gender. Whereas sexual, again, it's about preferences, knowing what you are and what do I prefer? Do I like girls? Do I like boys? Do I like none? Okay. So again, it's the beginning of that sense of preference. Okay. I'm not sure if someone, okay. How do we explain non-binary? Okay, so that's kind of I'm not even sure if we're going to discuss this in this course, honestly, because it's really complex. So what we're going through here now is more about like the stereotyped. I'm not going to say normal because again, so many other things are now called normal. But maybe if we find time in the course, we can, you know, discuss these other alternate ways, if you will. All right, so looking at the functions of the social environment, okay? So fostering a healthy narcissism and the ability to delay gratification. So what is healthy narcissism, okay? Does anyone know what is healthy? Because narcissism per se is not healthy, for sure, because what is healthy narcissism? Okay. So healthy narcissism could be confidence, self-esteem, okay? Yeah. And where do you get that from? Like, where do you get that sense of confidence, self-esteem? Okay, so parents. Okay. It's interesting because, I mean, you know, kids who are in foster care who don't have regular parents can still have that sense. So it's just any positive being in your environment, you know, some positive person, whether it's a parent, caretaker, who can kind of instill in you kind of the reflection. So remember when you said, like, when I said how kids need to believe that they're the apple of their parents' eye. So they need to like look in their parents' eyes or caregiver and feel like they are the world, okay? But also narcissists have a difficulty with delaying gratification. They want it now. It has to happen now, okay? So here it's the ability to delay that. It doesn't have to be now. Now kids are all about, I want it now. It has to happen now, or else there's a tantrum, they're upset. And parents tend to kind of give into providing instant gratification. And then that's going to completely ruin the healthy narcissism, because it actually fosters into true narcissism, okay? We work with parents, especially if they're parents, if it's their first child. It's really hard to hear your child cry and want something and not give it to them, okay? Because you start to feel guilty. And some parents will just give everything because they had nothing growing up. So it's part of like, you know, giving back to. So they, like, growing up, they didn't have much. So now they do have material things. So they will kind of give it to their children to avoid the sense of void that they had, okay? Again, is that healthy? It's not. This is not a healthy way of being. I saw a mom yesterday. She has a child who has ADHD. Again, that's a lot of kids that I see in the clinic. But her problem is that she is extremely soft, is the word. She's like, I'm too soft. I can never say no, okay? And so this kid is now a monster running the house because, like, no is not something that he doesn't register no. No means cry, tantrum, yell, hit, throw, and then no becomes transferred into a yes, okay? So really, we're working with her on making sure that a no means a no, and that she doesn't sort of feel guilty about it, especially if it's something for the child's better, you know, like regulating their PlayStation time, regulating when they go to sleep, especially if, you know, it's a 6 or 7 year old. We're not talking about somebody who's, you know, a 15, 16-year-old who should know, you know, who should manage their schedule, you know, because again, we're fostering independence. But, you know, you have a 6 or 7-year-old, obviously, you know, you're not going to leave it up to them as to when they're going to sleep or when they're going to study. I mean, you have to like regulate, okay? So the development of a true self, remember when we talked about Winnicott, the true self and the false self, okay? And that we all have the two, all right? And that your true self is the part of you that you are comfortable with, and you will show that to people who are not going to be judgmental of you and who will be accepting of you. And we all hope that those would be our parents, you know? It would be a shame if your true self is not something you can actually show to your own parents, okay? So the development of a true self begins with the awareness that the child aspires to be perfect. All kids want to be perfect. All kids believe that they are perfect, okay? So the kid that I saw yesterday, he is 9, the kid with ADHD, 8 or 9, with a very soft mom. Okay, so he wants to believe, or he believes that he is perfect, okay? He says, I am not, he didn't say I'm perfect, he says like, أنا مرة شاطر. So I'm good, I do everything well, and I'm like, okay, like, is that a fact? I said, you know, everything, do you do everything perfect? I'm like, but nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes, okay? So then he said, well, maybe I don't always listen to my mom, all right? So he comes out with this, I am the superhero. I don't know if any of you have ever watched Johnny Bravo, but I felt I was like looking at Johnny Bravo yesterday, like I am the macho guy. And then, I accepted the fact that, he could be perfect, but then I kind of gave way that it's okay to not be 100% perfect. Okay, we do make mistakes, and that's okay. Then he was better at saying, well, sometimes I do this and sometimes I do that. Obviously, like the mom's looking at me like she's got the glare of like it's always, he never listens. But again, I'm not gonna like beat out like his self-esteem and like destroy. That's not the objective. The objective is to develop rapport and to make the child feel it's okay to talk about things that you do as mistakes, but also to talk about things that you do well. Okay, because a lot of times when parents come into the clinic, they're coming in because of the problem. So they come in and say, he's this, that. And then you see this kid going from like a Johnny Bravo, like a macho, to like shrinking to the size of an olive in the chair, like they shrink. You can see their body posture changing just by all the negative things that this mom is saying to a complete stranger, someone they've never met before. So the role of me is to like, make him kind of open up again, not like shrink, like open up again. And so we look at their, I was like, well, what is he good at? What are his strengths? Again, fostering into that need to feel perfect, okay? We need to allow them to periodically view themselves as perfect, okay? And also that the parents are perfect. So that need for people to be perfect is positive. It gives a lot of energy, okay? So it's not okay for moms to completely tear down dads in front of their kids or vice versa, because it's really counterproductive, okay? If kids will see their parents as not perfect because, one parent shot the other one down, by showing all their non-perfection, okay? So when I see my parent as perfect, I aspire to be like them. They are my role model. I look up to them. But if my parent is not perfect, because either they say it, if like moms or dads who constantly tell their kids, I'm so sorry, you deserve better, it doesn't help these kids at all, because they need to see you as perfect, because that's what they aspire to be, okay? If you shoot that down, what is there to gain, okay? And it's also good for moms and dads to, even if the other parent is not, make them be, okay? Obviously, if you have a teenager and you have a parent who's into substance abuse, obviously this kid is not stupid, so you're not going to tell them, because they can see with their own eyes. So you don't want to like then make it be that the kid sees the dad being taken off by the police, and then mom's like, you have the most amazing dad. That's being a hypocrite, okay? So I hope you understand what I mean. If the child does not see the imperfections of one of the parents, we should not show these imperfections. Okay? We should not highlight these imperfections, because again, nobody is perfect, but you aspire to be as perfect as can be, okay? Okay. All right, maturation and the development of innate needs. So the early genital phase. Now next, after 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about Freud. So you're going to be hearing a lot of this stuff. So around age 3, kids start to focus on their genitals. And if you have brothers, sisters, like younger siblings, or cousins, or this is an interesting age where they start to like explore themselves. And we see it as well when you have like a 3-year-old with a newborn baby who's of different gender. And it's a very common question, like, how come it's different from mine? Because they're curious, okay, they want to know. They're very interested in exploring their bodies, like their belly button, their nose, their ears, as well as the genital area. It's just, exploration, okay? And young children may manipulate the genital area. It is common. It happens. I'm not gonna say common, it happens. It's not the end of the world, okay? Because it's really a panic button for pretty much all parents when they see their child, touching themselves, they really freak out. And I've had consults sometimes from like I had to give a presentation in a kindergarten because a lot of moms had concerns about this. And so we went to talk about, what does that mean? Okay. Do you think it is a sign of something alarming? Is it alarming if you see a child who touches their genital area? Is that like a red flag? So no, normal, no. Okay. So it's yes and no. It depends on how frequent does this happen, okay? And the preoccupation of the child with it, as well as the response of the parent to it, okay? So if you have a kid and that's all they're doing all day, 3 or 4 year old all day, that's all they're doing, that is a concern, okay? Because, why would they be engaging in this all day? Versus, occasionally it happens, or occasionally a parent sees their child like try to get onto a pillow or like a corner of a chair and just stimulate. A lot of times the beginning of this is coincidental. So coincidentally the child was sitting and there was a manipulation of this area and it felt fine. So I really compare it to kids who like suck their thumb. It's a habit. It feels good, but they don't understand because there are no sexual hormones, in kids who are 3, 6, 9. There are no sexual hormones. They have not hit puberty yet. So there isn't a sexual focus behind it. It's just a manipulation of an area. It felt fine. And so they continue to do it because it just feels fine, just as it feels good when they, suck their thumb. So we look at how frequent it happens. A lot of times when it's a very frequent behavior, we ask parents, who is handling this child? Because as child mental health, child protection always comes to our forefront. Like it's the forefront at the beginning of our thoughts out of concern for children. Especially with things like this, you worry, has this child been molested? Have they been handled in an inappropriate way by whoever? Okay. So we will ask this question, but it's not to incriminate anyone, because a lot of times there may be nobody, okay, it just may be a coincidental thing. And also it's something that we do see with children who have intellectual disability, okay, self-stimulation. And it's actually a problem, particularly for when they hit puberty and there are sexual hormones. And then there is manipulation of the genital area. And then parents don't know what to do. So I had this patient, 14-year-old autistic child. And so he is, handling himself everywhere. So he will take off his clothes and he has no sense of, obviously with autism, like privacy or who's in front of him or who's not in front of him. And so again, with this particular autistic child, this has been a behavior more noticeable since COVID, because he's at home, he's not going to the center. So that explains why that's happening with that kid, because there's no structure in the day. Okay, so we're working on making sure that there's better structure, obviously better observation of him, getting him engaged in whatever other activities to help reduce his sort of free time. Okay, and so when parents see their children do such a behavior, what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to yell, shout, hit? Are they supposed to completely ignore? What are they supposed to do? Let's see if anyone has anything to say about that. I don't know why. Hi, can you still see the screen?
No, doctor.
It's gone?
Yeah, it's done.
I'm not sure why, just a second. What about now? Just a second, I'm not sure. It says the window. Can you see it now?
Yes, doctor, it's back.
It's back, okay. I think I was trying to see the chat and I stopped share by mistake, okay. So grab their attention to something else, calmly explain to them not to do it. It's not appropriate. Talk to them about why it's happening, figure out if it's just curiosity. Okay, so I wouldn't talk to them about why it's happening. I would just distract them. Okay, so we start off by just completely, distracting the child, not reacting. So it's not like, some moms are like, oh my God, what are you doing? That's the first reaction. So we say, don't do that. You see it, you say, hey, come, I want to show you something, or come and help me with this. Okay, that should do it. Okay, like, just kind of getting their attention. Now, if it's a persistent thing, right? So I've seen parents, I've heard what interventions have been made. So I've heard parents say, be careful, you could hurt yourself. Okay. But I've heard the other extreme of, mom telling her son, if you don't stop, it's just going to fall off, or it's something like that, which is, kind of really freaky to say. So again, we do advocate for people to reach out to mental health providers if it's a persistent problem, okay? Because again, asking the child why they do that, they may not really have an answer. A lot of kids will say it just itches, it's itchy. So you're not getting anywhere. And you don't want to draw their attention to it, and you don't want them to notice that they really get your attention while they do it, because kids want attention, okay? And kids usually, unfortunately, get attention when they're doing negative things, because when they're doing great things, parents usually don't pay attention. And so we tell parents, if your child is engaging in any negative type of behavior like this or anything else, try to ignore it, but then praise them for good things that they do that are good. Like, he was like making a mess of something, and then he gets up and he sits and starts to draw. Then you say, oh my God, that's an amazing picture you're drawing. Look at how amazing it is when you're like quiet, or how you're like quietly doing something, highlighting quiet and peaceful, because when they're doing something that you don't like, and that's when they get your attention, they're going to continue doing whatever it is that bothered you, okay? Because they want your attention. So we always say, let them get your positive attention, not your negative one. Okay. So maturation and the development of physical abilities. Now we know from age 3 to 6, like we said, they're off to preschool. So obviously a lot of their like physical development is on par. Like we encourage them to obviously learn how to get on a bike, learn sports, because, it helps them improve their motor coordination. Then you get these growth spurts, like they start to grow bigger. Maturation and development of cognitive abilities. Now we've talked about Piaget and cognition, so you guys should be experts. Reality-based thinking, okay? So you want them to have magical thinking. It's amazing, it's part of being a child. But then you have reality-based thinking as well. And it really depends on two types of parents. So you have these parents that are psychologically aware and have a capacity for mentalization, okay? And they can use empathy and intuition to reflect on biopsychosocial stimuli, all right? Or you have parents that don't have that capacity. They have a deficiency in awareness regarding what's going on in their minds and the minds of their children. So mentalization, again, it's understanding, you know, how your child thinks, how your child feels. Okay, we call it like it's called the goodness of fit. So how well do you fit with your child? Okay, so you can have 4 or 5 kids, but do they all feel the same way about you? Do you feel the same? Again, let's not say feel, because, you know, parents love all their kids unconditionally, all the same. But in terms of getting along, so you can find a mom that says, you know, I get along with, you know, my daughter number 2 more than my daughter number 3. I understand her, she understands me. And so I'm actually seeing this family. So it's a divorced woman with 4 kids or 5, but I'm seeing her primarily for her second daughter, who is a 16-year-old young woman. And her older sister, so this patient is 16, her sister is 20, okay? Mom relates really well to the 20-year-old, okay? Because the 16-year-old is very different in traits and character from the mom, whereas the 20-year-old is very similar to the mom, like they're kind of similar. And so they have a better fit. So obviously the 16-year-old always feels like she's not understood, that she feels like her mom is not able to mentalize, like she doesn't understand me, she doesn't understand how I feel. Okay. And there's actually no empathy, like the relationship is really strained. And so what happened that kind of made things completely like blow out of proportion was about a month ago. So this girl has been telling her mom, I want to dye my hair, I want to dye my hair. And the mom's kind of not really listening. It's kind of going over her head. One day she walks in and the girl's hair is blue like the Smurfs blue. Okay, like that kind of blue, it's just blue, right? So because I saw her in the clinic the next day and it was like, I'm like, I don't know. It was interesting. Let's put it that way. So this girl again went blue. Part of it is a scream for attention, a scream for nobody understands me, nobody loves me. And so it was like a disruption in the dynamics. And so we're working on that in terms of, again, parents need to kind of hold the stick by the middle, especially when you have teenagers. It can't always be the parents' way. Obviously, this is in certain things, but in some things, it's just no way or the highway. Okay, there have to be like strict rules based on the family's outlook. Okay. So one of the things, for example, is, you know, smoking. So for some parents, there's no way on earth they're okay with their kids smoking, partly health, partly so many other things. So, you know, they could be, you know, very strict about that, versus, you know, what color to dye your hair, or should I cut my hair or keep it long? That's more of an individual preference. So we always tell parents, you know, kind of split between, or don't make a fuss about things that are an individual preference, so that you don't lose the whole game, if you will. Make a big deal about the things that you're, you know, feel strongly about because it's an ethical or moral issue, or related to how you want to parent your kids. You know, if you feel like I want my kids to cover up, I want my girls to be veiled, you know, these are like decisions that are versus, you know, she has to wear this color, or he has to, I don't know, go to the gym if he doesn't want to go. So these are kind of preferences that you should not really get involved in and make a big deal out of. Okay, but won't kids rebel? About what? Rebel about what? I'm not sure. Are we talking about if you control every, yeah, that's what I'm saying. You should not control every little preference. You should not. As a parent, you should not. You should allow for autonomy. okay? Because you don't want to have rebellious kids. Don't lose the battle. You make a big fuss over, things that you feel really strongly about that are really related to how you want to parent your kids. But individual preferences, you should not. You should just leave that space. So what I told the mom is, you could have talked to your daughter about, okay, I'm okay with you. Because the mom was, when the girl was telling her, I want to dye my hair blue, the mom was like, it's out of the question. It's not going to happen. It is impossible. I told her, listen, it's a personal preference. You could have told her, why don't you start off by doing like, low, like blue streaks, or do blue, you could have made a compromise. But the fact that you completely chose to ignore that this is something she wanted to do made her rebel. Yeah, exactly, that's what happened. She just went the complete opposite way, because it's like, it's my body, it's my hair. I can do with it whatever I want, okay? So you don't want to kind of be head to head on these things, because it's the beginning of an unpleasant path, really. It's going to continue unless the parent kind of has to budge a little bit. And then again, it's important to be one of these parents who can understand your children, can empathize, and not be one of the parents who's completely like clueless. You don't know what's going on with your kid. You don't know how they think. And why do you think that happens? Why do you think that, do you think do you think parents want to be clueless? If you have children, do you want to be clueless? Of course not, yes. But why do you think it happens? Why do you think that you have these parents that are just don't have that capacity? Do you think it's because they don't have the intellect, or why do you think there's that gap? Okay, so they lose touch, they get busy. Some don't put the effort. They focus on controlling, okay? They could be, I agree, they could be overwhelmed. It could be divorce. It could be, again, we're seeing a lot of single parents, okay? I like the idea, age gap, possibility, but sometimes the older, the wiser, You see older parents who are like more in sync and in tune. So you can have too many kids, possible personal issues, okay, mental health. So it's, again, so when I see so many options, I'm glad to see that, because it just means that, we're not a judgmental group. Okay, so when I see that all of you are thinking about diversity of reasons, so it just means that, okay, it doesn't mean that these parents are bad. So parents, the default is parents are good, and parents want what's best for their kids, but then they will come to you as a professional because there's a gap. They don't know why. They just are not getting along. So usually presenting complaint is, we're not getting along. Okay, or this kid is becoming more of a rebel. Some parents come and say, I can't control my kids. Okay, so I don't like hearing that. When I hear that, I worry about that. Like, I can't control my kids, because the objective is not to control them. The objective is to develop a relationship that's kind of reciprocal. So it's respectful, it's trusting, so that you want kids who love their parents and not fear them, right? We want to love our parents, not fear them. So that when you do something, it's because you don't want to upset your mom or your dad, because you love them, not that you're not doing it because you're afraid of them. Okay. Obviously fear is part of parenting. It exists. But you don't want to be the most dominant character in parenting, where kids will do things because they're so afraid, because that's actually worrisome. Okay. So sometimes parents don't understand how much the environment has changed and how it's different compared to what they've seen or used to. I agree, because that's one of the problems I'm facing with this mom. She's 49, so she's not like super old, but she's like, this behavior of dyeing the hair. She's like, she compares herself how she was with her own mother. She's like, I would never do this with my mom. I would never. So obviously I had to talk to her alone, not in front of her child, because again, I don't want to like put her down, but I'm saying, stop comparing. It's a complete different generation. Okay. The way you are with your mom may not be the way you are with your kid, because you are not the same as your child. You're this 16-year-old is completely different. Whereas the 20-year-old is very similar. So the 20-year-old will understand when you say, I was like this with my mom. She can relate to that. But the 16-year-old, absolutely not, because she's actually rebelling against the whole, so we need to kind of, get down to the level of the teenager, understand them, okay, and stop comparing. When I was your age, this is what we used to do. When I was your age, this is how I was. It actually irritates people. Like, kids really get irritated when they hear that, when I was your age, because obviously in their mind, we're not in the same generation, where it's a completely different time. So you don't want your kids to kind of like think less of you when you say things that don't really relate or make sense, okay? What if they began fearing their parents, different generations? How do you help parents build relationships back with their kids? So it's a very interesting question because, again, we walk in with the belief that everything can be fixed. I mean, I'm very positive when I'm with my patients. Everything I believe can be fixed, especially with kids, because they're growing, okay? Now, this is with the exclusion of sexual abuse. Obviously, if you have incest, if there is a parent who is sexually abusing their child, or who is physically abusive to their child consistently, now can you save that? For us with child protection, you save that by removing the child from that environment. So this is an extreme, okay? We're talking about like the day-to-day normal kind of, where parents don't understand their kids and kids are kind of drifting away. Kids are kind of being pulled more towards their peers because they feel understood and loved versus, not feeling understood or loved at home. So we're going to talk about that in the next lecture when we, talk about adolescence. But with younger kids, it's really easy to fix the gap because, you're the parent. So you kind of go down to their level, get involved with things that they do and really listen to them. I think one of the major keys in fixing relationships is communication. So when you actually listen, not just sit there and, the kid is talking and it's kind of going over your head, you're actually actively listening and trying to understand what they're saying. That really is like a huge step forward in building the relationship or like mending the relationship. Okay. So there's something called the theory of mind. It's a really interesting concept. So by around age 4 to 4.5, okay, kids start to grasp the concept, okay, that other people in the world can have different thoughts than myself. The world does not sort of, it's that sense of self where I end and the world begins, okay? They're more aware of the relationship between internal and external reality, okay? So that's a really interesting concept. Again, parents' input is helpful, okay? Because when kids are sad or mad at the world, okay? So parents can help these kids understand the difference between how I feel and the effect of the world on me versus, the world is bad. Everyone is bad, everyone is whatever, negative, just to make the child feel good, okay? So don't worry about them, they're all nasty kids, just so that the kid, no, this is not how you should do it. Because you want them to own up to their mistakes, understand where they are responsible, okay? So if your child, 6-year-old is unhappy with something, you want to help them try to understand this feeling and see how much of it is related to what they have done, to the world versus what the world has done to them. 6-year-olds, you can have that conversation as of, well, what do you think happened? Or why do you think that happened? Versus giving them your explanation, because your explanation is how you see it. It could be completely different from what the kid sees. I always advise parents, please listen. Don't immediately jump to give solutions, because you'd be amazed at how kids process things, okay? Because a lot of times parents want to fix things, right? So they're like, oh, don't worry, it's going to be okay. it's their fault, or next time they do that, just walk away. So again, you're giving them your own solutions to what you think should be done, but that may not give them space to express how they feel about something and come up with their own sort of ideas about how to fix something. You want them to be able to problem solve, okay? So problem solving is something that, you know, we can see that not a lot of kids, depending on how parents kind of engage with them, but you can have kids who don't know how to problem solve because no one's ever kind of given them that space, because whenever they have a problem, solutions are offered immediately. Pick one of these solutions, okay? None of them may work, all of them may work, but which one was this child's preference? We don't know, okay? So pretend play, again, magical thinking, is an interesting way of kind of looking at different realities, you know, exploring, you know, imagine if this happened, imagine if that happened. So it's a good way to look at different outcomes through pretend play. You know, if we did this, then that could, you know, so again, it's problem solving. So the mind's executive functions. So what are executive functions? We know what executive functions are, you know, like, again, problem solving, execution. So these are things, you know, from that age, 3 to 6, it's, you know, they're developing, okay? They could be more developed based on how much autonomy kids are given versus less developed because we don't allow them, okay? Now, this is an interesting concept, which is temperament, okay? So what is temperament? Can anyone tell me what is temperament? What do you think temperament is? Temperament is mood, okay? Character traits, okay? Personality. Okay. Person's nature. So I think all of the above, all right? Does temperament change? Are your temperamental characteristics who you are as a person, or is it a temporary thing when you're a child, and when you're older, these temperamental characteristics are different? So it can change. Okay. Change, they mature as you grow. Okay, so let's see. Let's look at what temperament is, the temperamental characteristics, and then I'll ask you that question again. So there are two psychiatrists married to each other, Chess and Thomas, okay? They came up with sort of 9 parameters to describe temperament. So temperament is pretty much your nature, okay? So they said there's 9 elements that go into the makeup of temperament. And then based on that, then they divided people's temperament into another sort of grouping, okay? So they looked at activity levels. Again, I want you to picture, you know, children in front of you, okay? So sometimes we see kids that are, again, we're talking about normal children, not kids with a disorder, okay? So some kids are more active than others, okay? Even think of yourself when you're a kid compared to your siblings or your cousins. So some of us are like quieter, and so our activity level seems to be like less, like we are, you know, low key in terms of our activity level. And some of us are more active. So it's kind of your activity level, whether it's high or low. Rhythmicity is more like your internal clock. So of when you sleep, when you eat, when even going to the bathroom, like the bowel movement. So your rhythmicity. So some kids are like have very regular in terms of when they sleep, when they eat, when they go to the bathroom, and some kids are not as organized. So this rhythmicity is variable. Okay. The third is approach or withdrawal response. This is in with respect to a new situation. So when you expose a child to a new situation, some kids are more readily approaching this, they're more eager to experience or experiment, Whereas some kids tend to kind of, withdraw, like they tend to shy away from a new event, okay? That following that is the adaptability to change. So how are these kids able to cope with change? So some kids are very flexible, and so they can accommodate change really easily. And some kids hate change, and so when there is a change, it affects them negatively. They're not flexible, and so parents will pick up on that, and that this kid, put him wherever, there's no problem. I just need to take this urgent call from the hospital. I will just be with you. Hi, I'm back. So I just had a patient in the ER, and so I had to just make sure my resident was going to see the patient. Okay. So adaptability to change, like I said, how flexible or not is the child in terms of new situations. The threshold of responsiveness or sensitivity. Okay, so some kids, in terms of their whether they have a high or low threshold to stimulus, to input. Okay, some kids with a high threshold have a high intensity of reaction. So number 5 and 6 are related. So if the threshold is quite low, okay, sorry, so if the threshold is low, they have a higher intensity of reaction, because they're like, incidents that happen, and their response is way out of proportion to the incident. That means that their threshold is quite low. Versus somebody, same incident occurring to another child who has a high threshold. So their ability to kind of tolerate is higher, then their intensity of reaction is less, okay? So this is, again, a temperamental difference. So some parents will tell you, my God, his response was like unreal, completely blown out of proportion to something that didn't really make sense, versus their sibling, chill, like the world can like blow over and they're like, whatever, okay? So this kind of threshold and intensity of reaction is a temperamental variation. Mood is mood, because one of you mentioned mood. So some kids are grumpier than others. Just, I'm not saying like it's depression, but some kids, parents will describe them as just happy-go-lucky. They're happy all the time. Whereas some kids are irritable. They tend to have an irritable mood, easily bothered. So that goes with 5, 6. So 5, 6, and 7 are related. So let's say that somebody who has a low threshold is going to have a high intensity of reaction and will usually have an irritable mood, okay? Versus somebody who has a high threshold, lower intensity of reaction, and so their mood tends to be more bubbly or happy. I hope you can see the connection. The degree of distractibility is, how distractible are kids in life and play? And we're not talking about children with ADHD. So in nursery or daycare, the preschool teacher will pick out, oh my God, this kid, if they're focused, okay, and again, 8 and 9 can be connected. So some kids are like more focused, even if there's stuff going on in their environment, they're just focused on what they're doing, they're less distractible. And so then these children will like by default have more persistence in the face of obstacles. Again, obstacles here are like, putting together a puzzle. We're not talking about like major obstacles in life, but we're talking about, given a task that is of, varying complexity or difficulty. And so they have that persistence of, sitting there to actually finish it. Versus kids who are easily frustrated, more distractible, and so they'll sit there for a little bit, get frustrated, and just like move on. So these are not disordered children, but you can see that it kind of describes different profiles of people. And when you look at yourself, okay, like reflecting on yourself, so you may be somebody who is more on the active side, okay, compared to your peers. Like your peers that tend to want to sit, and you're like one of the people wants to kind of get up and move around or play or whatever, like, you know, do physical stuff. And then compared to others, maybe you're somebody who's a lot more like your schedule is fixed, like you like to eat at a particular time, you like to sleep at a particular time, compared to someone else who's just, you know, can eat whenever, sleep whenever. You may be somebody who, you know, likes new things, you're more adventurous, or you may be somebody who's like more cautious, or, you know, doesn't really like new things all the time. You may be somebody who's really flexible with change or not, okay? Again, 5, 6, and 7, you may be somebody who overreacts to things, and maybe blows things a bit out of proportion, and so tends to be more irritable than your peers, or vice versa. And you may be somebody who's more easily distractible, and therefore you, or in life you've found that you've had to like make certain accommodations to your environment to make you less distractible. And then maybe somebody who's more impatient, and so again, as you get older, you try to kind of find ways to push yourself to, you know, be more persistent with, you know, certain obstacles. So again, so the question is, do these things change, yes or no? Okay. I don't know. After hearing this, what do you guys think? Do these things change, or do they not? So someone said, can you explain rhythmicity? So rhythmicity is like your biological clock, if you will. You know, sleep time, eating time, rest time, bathroom time, okay? So it's a lot of you are saying it depends on the person. Yes, they can change. So I think bottom line is insight. You know, are you insightful enough to realize that, you know, these temperamental characteristics, are they going well for you, or are they going against you? Okay. 9 is changeable. Yeah. Again, it's really based on you as a person, your insight into these things, and if they are causing you a problem in your life. Okay. So if you realize that you're like such an over person, you're like, everything's like over. Okay. And it's pointed out to you, and it's actually affecting your interpersonal relationships with people that you're always of what, like we call it, like you're just like over. Then you start to try to understand, is there a reason why you are like that? And if it's just who you are as a person, can you modify it? So yes, you can, based on your insight and your motivation to change. So those are the two things that are necessary: insight and motivation to change. Okay. And some people are just happy with who they are. They're not the most spontaneous people on earth. They're not the most kind of like, you know, let's go out and just explore the world. That's just not who they are. But it's interesting that they can then be attracted to people who are like that. So you find, like, you know, partners, maybe opposites in this kind of thing. And so one is like wanting to, like, you know, fly, and one wants to like not even be a turtle, and then they complement each other. And so they both change, kind of one slows down a bit and the other just propels. Okay. So it's just interesting. But I mean, my point is, it's important to know yourself. Interestingly, when I was doing my residency, one of the things, again, it was not a compulsory thing in my program, but in some psychiatry programs, it's compulsory that you get psychotherapy for yourself. So in your 4 years of residency, they will require in some programs that you yourself go through psychotherapy. I wish it was compulsory in my program, because I didn't even know that was a possibility. And I think it's great, because, you know, it's important for us to understand who we are, you know, especially like with psychiatry. If you understand who you are, because then how are you going to help people if you don't know who you are as a person? I mean, obviously, you know who you are as a person, like, you know, concretely, but in terms of, you know, things like this, your temperament and how it affects you and affects others. Now, we have something that we call peer, like, you know, peer support, like, you know, especially we'll talk about this when we talk about Freud and psychotherapy. But a lot of times we reflect with our colleagues about how we feel in certain things, certain situations, and then they help bring some insight into, our responses if we don't really understand them or struggle with them. Can nature be inherited too? If both parents are more mild-mannered, calm, can their children be the opposite just by nature? You mean, okay, by genetics or by environment? So yeah, we've seen parents that are so mellow and almost timid, if you will, like just very, like everything is on the low, like the threshold is super high, intensity of reaction is super low, and their mood is just very like flatline, okay? And then they have a child who's like completely opposite, so there's genetics, okay? So nature and nurture will always kind of interplay, and it's an interesting combination of interplay, because what happens is if you have both parents that are, as you described, on the very calm and kind of that end of the spectrum, they don't know how to deal with a child who's the complete opposite. They just don't know how to manage, okay? And they want to kind of fit that child into their like square or circle, and you can't do that because then the fit doesn't go. You cannot put a circle, you can't put like a cube into a triangle or a circle into a cube. It doesn't, it doesn't work that way, okay? So that's why I tell parents, your 5 fingers are not the same. So your kids are not the same, okay? So therefore, the way you deal with one has to be different from the other because, they're not all the same. Let's see what, okay. Is it based on experience and their baseline at home? So then in that child's life, if both parents continue to compare this child to themselves, it would inhibit their development. It's not that it's going to inhibit, it's just going to create more of a gap and sometimes even resentment, if you will, because you don't want your parents to continue to compare you to them because you're like, okay, I'm not you, so let's move on. Eventually, that's what kids will say, because it's like you as a human being need to feel accepted. So if I'm constantly compared to someone else, so that by default means I'm not accepted for who I am. And so going back to the true self and the false self, so therefore unconsciously, I'm going to show you my false self, which is what you want to see. So you want to see somebody who's not really me, okay? So it kind of causes a split, if you will, and it really creates a gap. And so, will parents notice it in early childhood? Maybe not, because kids, 6, 7, 8, they're generally compliant. Unless you have a disorder on board like ADHD, where the child by default is super active and impulsive and oppositional, and so then you start to have an issue with dealing with. But I'm saying, if you have these kind of parents, eventually, like in the teenage years, they run into issues because then kids are a lot more outspoken, and adolescence is all about autonomy. It's just being completely separate. So you want kids to be autonomous, but not completely away from you. Like you don't want to lose your kids. So based on these 9 sort of parameters, they then just kind of grouped kids into 3 types of temperamental variations. So they said, based on these 9, you can have kids that are easy, kids that are difficult, and kids that are slow to warm up. So easy kids are obviously kids who have a very flexible schedule. Their threshold of responses is mild. They're not overly reactive. They adapt to change. So all of the positive in the 9 make a child easy. And so easy kids, again, parents will tell you, oh my God, like their childhood was a breeze of like fresh air. She was a breeze of fresh air. I didn't feel that she caused any problems. She listens, she's compliant, she does her work. She is just a breath of fresh air. That's how they describe. Versus her brother or her other sister who is difficult. So difficult usually means moody, temperamental, irritable, non-compliant, doesn't adjust well to change, not very flexible. So it's a difficult child, okay? Then you have the third, which is slow to warm up. So these are kids that are kind of, I really compare them to when you take something out of the freezer and you let it just sit until it defrosts. So these are defroster kids, I'll call them. So it's a child who's semi-anxious, kind of not very eager and sort of excited about change, but they're not completely inflexible. So they're not difficult. So they're in between the easy and the difficult. But an example of this kid is somebody who goes to a birthday party that they really wanted to go to, but they spend the entire birthday like sitting next to their mom. Okay, and then before it's time to go home, this kid gets up to start to play because now they feel they're ready. So they've already like defrosted, and so they're ready now to kind of play, and it's unfortunately time to go home. Okay, so these kids are more anxious children. Okay, because they tend to scan the environment. They're not going to run blindly into it. Okay, but they're not going to be like the difficult ones who will just absolutely not. Okay. So kids that are slow to warm up, we tell parents to try to always expose them to new situations constantly so that their defrosting process gets better with time, okay? Now, difficult kids, it is a difficult situation. It's very hard for parents dealing with difficult kids because there's a lot of emotions involved, and parents unfortunately may end up being physically aggressive with these kids, feeling guilty about it, then trying to make it up to these kids because they hit them. And so you can imagine like the dynamic is very difficult as well. So there are articles written about difficult kids, children with difficult temperament. So if ever you're interested in becoming a child psychiatrist, you can definitely learn more about that. So maturation and development of emotions. Okay, so emotions are energy mobilizers, obviously. Okay, they govern emotional expression. So emotions will they're energetic. Okay, looking at emotions as self-regulators. Okay, so there's various shades and ranges of emotions. Regulating anxiety becomes important, and it's prominent between age 4 and 5. And recognizing when they're anxious and discriminating what they're anxious about. So pretty much, I'm scared. So I'm scared is a super, super common expression of an emotion that kids experience, and it's normal. So anxiety, I'm not saying anxiety as a disorder, but generally fear. Okay, so fear is a very common thing. I don't know if you guys ever saw the cartoon Monsters Inc. It's really old. Okay, but basically it's about like children's fears and how kids like I have patients who before they sleep they want to check under the bed for monsters, want to look in their closet for monsters. Okay, so and they're in that age of magical thinking where they believe monsters could exist. Okay, but generally when they are afraid, okay, a mom will say, oh, don't be afraid, I'm here. Okay, that's one type of mom. Okay? Don't be afraid, mommy's here. Versus like how are you feeling afraid, or why are you afraid, or what's making you afraid, or what are you afraid of? Okay, is another way to go about it. Okay, the combination is great. So first you start off by trying to understand, okay, why do they feel afraid, or what's scaring them? Okay, because here is the interpretation. So they feel something, but then they're interpreting it, and based on their interpretation they become afraid. Remember when we talked about like the biopsychosocial, so there's a stimulus generates an emotional response, a thought process, and then a behavior. So this kind of circuit is really the one that's essential, and we're going to talk about that when we talk about emotions in another lecture, in the development of anxiety disorders. Okay, so it's the misconception or the mismatch between what you feel, how you think about it, and then what you do about it. Okay, so this kind of triangle is the origin of a lot of anxiety disorders and mood disorders. Okay, so important to talk to the kids about like what they feel, why they think. Don't don't dismiss it. Okay, don't say, oh, that's ridiculous, or no, you should not dismiss it. Don't magnify it. Don't increase it. And then at the end, saying like, don't worry, I'm here, good and bad, because it may kind of reinforce that don't worry because I'm here. So therefore, when I'm not here, then you should worry. Okay. So again, the weight of the words that we use, I'm not saying we're going to become paranoid and like kind of assess every single word we say to our children. But again, these sentences I will notice, especially if I have a problem. Like if there's a problem with a child, I will notice. So I was once seeing this kid around 5 years of age for separation anxiety. Like they could not let go of their mom. They could not be in a separate room. Okay. So if that's a presenting problem, you do not want to start off the interview by separating mom and child, because obviously you're going to be like the nasty doctor who's taking, my safety away from me. So we sat together and we're talking, and then I'm like, is it okay? The kid was feeling comfortable. I'm like, is it okay if I talk to you for a little bit, and mom, we'll just wait outside the door, okay? The kid was okay. So the mom, in her walking out of the office of the clinic to go outside to sit just outside, she asked her child, like, I don't know, 100 times. She's like, are you okay? I'm just going to go out. Don't worry. I'm just walking out. I'm just going to. So in her reassurance of this child, she actually made him anxious, because like, just, I'm outside. We already discussed it. I'm with him, or can't remember if it was a him. Yeah, I'm with him. He said it's okay. So just leave. So there was a lot of anxiety on her part too. So separation anxiety a lot of times could be fostered by both. So the mom doesn't want to separate from the child, and therefore the child does not want to separate from the mom. So in that particular situation, it was really the mom. So she would do a lot of things, say a lot of comments like, don't worry, I'm here. You're safe that I'm here. So you're only reinforcing that, what if you're not here? You're not going to be there 24/7. He goes to school. So does that mean that if you're not there because he's in school, then he should be afraid that he is not safe? So we pick up on these comments that are really unconscious. She's not saying it out of an intention to kind of, but that's how anxious she felt, okay? So that was our role. We pick up on these subliminal things, and we help parents by, first of all, let's stop saying these things. If you say we're going to go, then just go. Don't keep checking on him just to make sure that, what if he tells you, no, don't go out? Then what? Are you going to stop halfway through? You're almost near the door and he says, no, don't leave. Are you going to go back? So why are you putting yourself and your child in a situation to make them feel even more anxious? Okay, so you get what I'm saying? It's sometimes things that we say in our behaviors really instill anxiety in our children. Emotions as facilitators of social adaptation. Okay, so again, how they help kids in self-regulation and social adaptation, adapting to social situations. So emotions are essential. So obviously, if a child is autistic, okay, does that mean that they don't have emotions, or they have problems in regulation of emotions? What do you guys think? With kids who are autistic, is it that they have no emotions, or they have problems in emotional regulation? So it's regulation of emotions, okay, because they do feel, all right? So they do feel because they're human, all right? But it's the way that they express or regulate, the problem is there. Maturation and development of verbal language abilities. We've talked about that. I'm just going to kind of go summarize. Okay. By age 3, obviously kids use speech, thought, and behaviors to achieve a belief in their own ability to anticipate and predict events. So this is complex but simple, right? In normally developing children who are 3 years, 4 years of age, okay, they are able to understand events, anticipate consequences. So that's kind of what it means. They begin to remember things from the past, okay, reproductive memory is what it's called, or reconstructive memory, where they generate a fantasy based on a recalled memory and a reconstruct memory. So it's interesting because I see kids, who make up people and you know, like, so she says she's got, you know, 3 siblings, but she's the only child. And the names that she mentions, it's a fantasy because, you know, she wants to have sisters, but then she doesn't. But she'll tell you the names, and then you figure out from asking her parent that these are, you know, her cousins or her friends at school, okay? So that's more of a reconstructive memory. So a fantasy based on something that they recall. So she has cousins, but then she's reconstructing a new memory where these cousins are now her sisters, okay? So someone can say that this is lying. What do you guys think? Is this lying? Okay, so it is not lying, okay? It's really imagination, so not even misunderstanding. So it's again, we're talking about kids, you know, 3 to 6, so a lot of imagination. I'm not going to say dreaming, maybe wishful thinking. So when this 4-year-old says my sisters are like, you know, gives you 3 other names or 2 other names, and then you realize that these are their cousins that they really love. You know, so moms should say, stop lying. No, she should not, because it's not a lie. So we explain, by the way, this is not, it's just their imagination at play. But if you have because I have a patient right now, she's a 15-year-old patient, who's really making up these stories that are unreal. Okay, so even me, I have to double check with her mom because it just feels like they're absolutely true. So this is a girl with, you know, kind of personality issues. So she's a personality disorder in the making. So very difficult sort of family dynamics, but this is not reconstructive memory. Is it lying? I'm still trying to figure it out. Somebody I just started to see. Yeah, so she makes up stories and tells her friends stories, but the problem is she tells me, I make up stories and then I believe them and I actually start to live them. So I'm thinking, you know, is this girl psychotic? Is she delusional? So still trying to figure it out. Okay. The development of self and object relationships. Okay. So Stoller says the core gender identity is, okay, an unquestioned and unthinking conviction. All right. So it's a piece of identity that they are male or female, and this is established by the age of 3. So by age of 3, kids know absolutely indefinitely if they're a girl or a boy. Okay. Now, exhibitionism, all right, you know, it happens, daycare, you know, a kid just decides to, you know, lift whatever and show the others the private parts. It's part of being, you know, being curious, also instilling that responsive, oh my God, and, you know, kids running everywhere. But do you want to label it a disorder? Again, for anything to be a disorder, there has to be a disturbance in function. Okay, so if this child is consistently exposing themselves, that is a problem, versus it's a one-timer, they're experimenting. And again, when kids are curious about their genitals, it's also a time to teach them about privacy, that how they need to like protect it. Some kids have body damage anxiety, and again, it depends on what parents. Remember that parent I told you was who told her kid that, you know, if you don't stop touching it, it's going to fall off. So then you're actually instilling anxiety that, oh my God, things can fall off. The development of peer identity, the need for peer interaction and learning to share. These are just kind of go without needing to explain. Now, we're going to talk about the superego in more details when we talk about Freud, but generally, people can feel guilty when, again, we're talking about kids, as that's how it starts. You first need to know the difference between right and wrong. Okay, so you need to know that if I take someone's stuff without telling them, without asking, that is wrong because it's like stealing. So I need to instill these like basic ethical, moral sort of things to my child. Then they need to believe that they have a choice between the two behaviors. So I know that I should not take something that's not mine, but I can or I can't. So I have a choice, okay? Then to realize that I've made a bad choice, okay? Oh, I took something that wasn't mine, that was bad, okay? Then I feel guilty. Now, are we saying that we want our lives, you want to have a guilt-laden life, like you want to live your life just feeling guilty about everything? No, that's not what we're saying. But we're saying that guilt is a normal emotion, as long as it's not feeling like it's not blown out of proportion. Because sometimes you have kids who feel guilty for breathing because they took air that someone else should have breathed. This is an extreme. So you don't want to have kids who feel guilty for existing, but then to feel guilty because they have done something wrong, okay? And you want, again, eventually that to be something that's autonomous, self-generated, but it will be self-generated eventually. But as a kid growing up, someone has to teach you what's right, between what's right and what's wrong. You made the wrong decision, and someone tells you, well, you know what, you made the wrong decision, that was not correct, you will be punished. Because obviously we have to punish kids when they're younger, otherwise they will not, you will not reinforce a positive behavior if there's no consequence, okay? Now, if a parent, like you have a 4-year-old who does something wrong, and you just talk to them, you're just like, that was wrong, you shouldn't do that. They repeat, and then you said, well, that was wrong, you shouldn't do that. I mean, is that the most appropriate way to parent a 4-year-old, do you guys think? Versus, that was wrong, there is a consequence, whatever it is, time out, you take away their whatever, so that it just kind of leaves in their overall sort of understanding that there will be a consequence to things that I do that are wrong. But just talking to me about it is not going to fix it, okay? So do you guys think there should be punishment, or just like, a chat? Yeah, so consequences are necessary, absolutely, because it leaves an imprint. But again, we never say that, we don't want parents to be like slapping their kids, or and again, you don't want them to have super ego anxiety, and that's when you over install guilt, when you kind of raise your children to feel guilty about everything. Because there are some parents that do that, so the kid kind of grows up feeling guilty about anything and everything, because they do something wrong, and then they kind of give you a whole like kind of like a bunch of like negative things about how bad you are and how could you have done something like that, and it just never ending. So you have these people who are going to be super ego anxious because they always feel like they've wronged someone, or done something wrong. So we don't want to do that, okay? Okay, within reason, after deciding with the child the fact there will be, again, you don't sit and decide with a 4-year-old what they think their punishment should be, okay? They're too young for that. But for sure, if you have like a 9-year-old and they know that they should not do something particular, okay, and they've done it, you can sit and say, okay, with this behavior, what do you think we should do? And again, it's part of seeing what is it your child is going to say. And you say, that you're going to have to be punished, okay? So you can have that conversation, but you're not going to discuss with a much younger child, well, what do you think we should do? Because you're the parent, so you should know what you should do, okay? Tell the child not, you won't, what? Tell the child to not. Okay, so again, it depends. When kids do something and then you tell them, if you do it again, you will not get whatever. So you're already putting a consequence, okay? So the consequence, whether it's in perspective, whether it's effective immediately, it could vary depending on the behavior. So we sit and discuss with parents behavioral programs, depending on the type of behavior. So some types of behaviors, for example, this kid is hitting everyone. Okay, he's slapping his parents, he's hitting. So this is not acceptable behavior because it's not safe. This is different than, they're not really they don't want to brush their teeth. So the kind of consequence and the way you're going to deal with a child not wanting to brush their teeth, completely different than with a child who is hitting people, okay, swearing at people. So these are like alerts, okay, you need to intervene, versus a kid who just, doesn't want to brush their teeth, or doesn't want to change their clothes, okay? You want to foster self-responsibility and self-love. So from this super ego, okay, knowing what's right and what's wrong, choosing to do the right thing. If you choose to do the wrong thing, then you to know that you've done something wrong, to bear the consequences, to be responsible for your behavior. Again, by putting consequences, you teach responsibility. Okay. Looking at adaptational capabilities, okay. So repression, and we're going to talk about that further in more details when we talk about Freud. So repression is an automatic unconscious mental process, okay, that bars from conscious awareness certain things, okay. So it's a defense mechanism that we're going to learn about, okay. So generally we tend to repress things that are unpleasant. So things that generate disapproval, memories that are unpleasant or generate unpleasant emotions, your system tends to repress it. You don't do this consciously, your system does. So it's kind of like really in the very back of your mind, in almost your subconscious mind. And this kind of an automatic response, it starts to emerge from a young age. You know, they're saying from as early as 18 months, and becomes more prominent as we get older. And so sometimes, again, things that happen to you in your childhood, it's repressed. It's not stuff that you're going to remember, okay? And so let's say victims of abuse, all right? The outcome of abuse is quite variable. You have people who have been abused who go on to have completely normal lives, and you have victims of abuse who have shattered lives. It's variable because, again, biopsychosocial, people are different, their defense mechanisms and responses are different. But sometimes people, and again, one of my friends who's a marital therapist tells me couples sometimes come into therapy because of intimacy issues, okay? So she has issues with intimacy. And so when they get into like the whole like therapy or whatnot, there are times when these repressed memories of abuse come. So every time she's with her partner and there is intimacy, there's a distance that she doesn't understand. Although this is a person that she's always loved and always wanted to marry, but why is there this distance? And so when they get into it with her own therapy, and then looking at, you know, her life experiences, and sometimes these repressed memories can come out with therapy. And so this particular woman, just again with therapy, came to kind of, it came to her awareness that, you know, she was molested as a child. And so that was repressed, but it was enacted in her lack of intimacy with her husband. Okay. So you can see how it's really like the mind is just a very complex organ, and it's very intricate. And so, you know, sometimes our behaviors as adults that we don't understand can go back to things that happened to us when we were kids that were repressed. And I'm not saying that everybody was, you know, abused, or I'm not saying that. There could be all sorts of experiences, you know, feeling that you were neglected or whatever, negative, because again, repressed emotions or memories are usually negative things, or otherwise our system doesn't repress them, because it can actually live, you know, we live well with positive things, but sometimes these negative things, in order for us to continue, they need to be repressed or removed. And subhanAllah, this is how our system functions, okay? So we get this, you know, repression. And sometimes people go through life, again, without ever a need to look at anything that was repressed, because, you know, let's say this woman never got married. Okay, so she never got married. So there was never a need for her to actually explore, you know, the lack of intimacy, because it just didn't happen. She was never married, you know? So it's the same person, but the life circumstance could be different. And so the need for an intervention could vary based on the life circumstance, okay? So repression usually helps kids adapt, okay? And it's usually, again, overused to repress traumatic experiences in life, okay? And then people who work with trauma, like it's a very specialized area, because again, you need to know how to ask, when to ask, what to do with the information that you receive. So it's a very complex sort of area to work with. I'm just going to look at these last two questions before we end, okay, because this is the last slide. Okay, so there, it was just a comment about the ones, when we talked about guilt before, about punishment. All right. Doctor, don't you think 3 to 6 is too young an age to develop sexual identity preference? Again, it's the beginning of. So, you know, if you talk to girls that are like 5, 6, again, you're talking about KG and grade 1. I've seen kids who have a crush. So she has a crush on this boy in her class. He has a crush on this. So it's like a preference. Like and when you say, or this kid who has a crush on his teacher because he thinks she has beautiful hair. Okay, he loves her hair. Okay. When my daughter was in preschool, mashallah, she has long hair. There was a little boy who just loved her hair. Like he just loved seeing her hair in braids or. And then there was a lice outbreak in the school. Again, she was 5. They were 5-year-olds. Lice outbreak. So I had to put her hair up. Okay, I put it in like 2 buns. And then his mom calls me that day and he's like crying because her hair was not, you know. So it's a preference for the way he had a crush on her. So I thought was cute. But again, so when we say sexual identity preference, take away the hormones. Okay, and the lust. So there's none of that. It's just, you know, an interest in the way the person is, the way they look. And you know, if you talk to 5, 6-year-olds, yeah, they do have crushes. But it's just, yeah, like you said, it's very innocent. There are no hormones involved. It's innocent and adorable, yeah. So now this kid still has a crush on my daughter, but you know, thank God they're not in the same school anymore. Anyways, so it was lovely talking to you guys. I'll see you next week, inshallah. Take care.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thanks.